Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. This week on Tent Talk, we're talking about the different ways that organizations can manage their farmers markets and some of the pros and cons of each. Hey everyone, I'm one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I'm a longtime farmers market manager, Vendor 101 co-teacher, and education coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, Director of San Diego Markets, still an active farmers market manager and consultant, founder of Farmers Market Pros, and host of Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, and the Farmers Market Pros community.
And I'm Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer, marketing director for Farmers Market Pros, and logistics coordinator for Intense, the Farmers Market Conference 2022.
Which is, I feel like it's sort of snuck up on us, even though we've been working on it for almost a year. It's like, whoa, it's about to be conference time.
Every podcast, we're like, it's coming. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's coming.
Yeah. Well, now that it's 2022,
Yeah.
it's like, it's here. I always get confused promoting it because I'm talking about it like it's the next year.
Yeah.
But now we're in that next year.
Now we're
Yeah,
here.
it's less confusing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
we
All
can
of
just move
2021, I kept saying last year's conference, and I think, no, that was earlier this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
But, 21 and 20 were such weird years. It was hard to keep track of all that.
We've been in a time-space continuum, so now
Yeah.
we can just start fresh. We're moving forward
right.
from here, right?
Yep.
As Kat says, we're in 2022 over.
Yeah, we're getting a 2022 over. That's right.
So we're really excited. It really is coming up. It's happening. It's all happening.
It's happening.
Very excited.
Live and in person again.
Yes, I'm super jazzed about that.
Yeah.
And it's always so fun. I mean, it's not the very beginning of the year. It's like the end of Q1. But it's just a great way to like kick off your year, shake off the doldrums of the deep winter and just get excited for the start of your farmers market season or the start of spring.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah,
get
to
some
be
inspo.
clear, it's not really the end of Q1. So if you think we have that
Okay,
much
yeah.
time to plan, you are
Don't give
sadly
people
mistaken.
a false sense of security.
But it's like
But
it
it feels like it.
solid 2 months into
I feel
the
like
year.
January and February are like long because you're wrapping up a bunch of things from the prior year, holidays and all that stuff, like get everyone back out to school and stuff. So it's like a long 2 months, but then
I think
don't
the
forget,
1st of March is when the year really starts.
I think so too.
Yeah.
That is kind of how I feel every year.
And I realized the other day when I was writing my new 2022 planner, which was thrilling. And I was writing.
Did you burn the 2021 planner?
No, I keep it because it's good to look back on
that's a
later.
good reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was writing the Intense, very ceremoniously writing Intense conference in my planner. And I realized that International Women's Day falls in the middle of our conference, which will be fun. for
Hey.
Our all-female run conference.
Oh, I'm
right.
excited
Yeah.
about that.
That's right.
Girl power.
Got a lot of
Yay.
men speaking this year.
That's good.
That's good too because
More than
sometimes
we-
we're
more
like,
than we
let's just
have
have
for
the
a while,
ladies. And then we're
right?
like, no, we need to have some mans.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
They've become kind of the minority in our industry, I feel like.
Don't tell them that.
Yeah, I don't think they'll like that. It's a good
never
mix,
know.
though. I do feel like we're very conscientious of like getting a good wide range and a mix of people, different viewpoints, people that run their organizations in different ways and things like that, so we can really learn a nice broad range of information. I
Yeah.
always learn so much because we do that, and it's not just people that do things our way that are just like us speaking to us. I like when we, that's the whole kind of point of bringing everyone together from all over is getting all these different viewpoints and from different people doing different things.
Yeah, and from different parts of the country or
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah, try to be really intentional about that.
Yep.
We may have some surprises about speaking of people from different parts of the world, but still a surprise. So.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
Surprise to us as
Let us
well.
know, Kat. Kat is always surprising us, even the day of. We love it. Justine and I love
it's
that
a
part.
good way to mask procrastination of just being like, no, it was planned all along. It was a surprise.
It was a surprise. That's why I didn't tell you about it earlier.
We're on to you. Oh, they're usually always good surprises, though. So
Yeah.
appreciate that.
We'll see some fun surprises.
Thanks,
so,
Kat.
Yeah, we'll be seeing y'all
Yeah, get your tickets.
with planned content and some surprises. March 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Woo!
Coming up soon.
Yep.
Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by MarketWurks. Escape the stuffed 3-ring binder and the generic spreadsheets and consolidate your market applications, space reservations, invoicing, and reports into one convenient program. MarketWurks can help. It's easy to establish and update vendor profiles and create polished market maps to give your website and your marketing some extra love with MarketWurks' simple interface. If you're ready to streamline your market management systems, contact Chris at MarketWurks by clicking on their logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com or meet him in person at the MarketWurks booth at Intense, the Farmers Market Conference in March.
Welcome back to Tent Talk. This week, we are getting into the different approaches that nonprofits and community organizations, etc., can take when it comes to managing their farmers markets.
We've had a lot of experience in that in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah.
We've worked with a lot of groups that have been trying to figure out the best way to go, either with a new market or a market in transition or an organization in transition. So that's been interesting to kind of dig deep and help people through the process of figuring out what the best approach is for them.
Yeah, doing consulting, a lot more consulting, especially recently, has really helped us kind of understand how these different organizations work. I feel like I had a really good understanding of the kind of different ways that markets get brought to the street and who's running them, but really just learning more about that and all the different approaches that people can take.
Yeah, and as we've seen in the last 2 years, a lot of turnover, market management. If we'll get into it today, and I'm going to be the one asking a lot of questions because I don't have a whole lot of experience on this side of things. But for those market managers that are in transition, or maybe they're letting go of one market or moving on to another market, Kat and Bridget are going to give some helpful tips on how to make your contracts with these different organizations robust and beneficial to both sides.
Yeah. And if you're an employee of if you're like a in-house staffer at a nonprofit or a city that's running a market, how you can, manage your market that way as well.
Yeah, how to think about things a little bit differently. We've actually got a great session coming up at Intense on transitions. Remember that Michael Hurwitz will be with us. He was with Grow New York City's green markets for 14 and a half years.
Amazing markets.
Yeah, great markets. And had a big job description. He did farmers liaison work and also worked with the markets and with the city and all of that, and left after a really long period of time. So he's going to be talking at the conference on when you make the decision to leave, how you come to that conclusion, and then what the graceful way is to make that transition and to find your replacement.
Yeah. That's not a surprise. We knew about that.
Yeah. I was just like, ooh.
You told us. But that's really important, I think, even if you're not thinking about leaving soon. If you're thinking about ever leaving, which we all are at some point, it's like setting your management systems up to be easier to transition.
That's right.
Because if you don't, you get locked, you get stuck. Yeah. And if you care a lot about your market, you don't want to leave it hanging. And if you have really good transition systems set up prior to wanting to leave, then you won't feel like you're leaving it hanging. And so that's something to really keep in mind, just like starting now, no matter what part of your journey, even if you just started working at a market. Get this kind of data sorted out, be organized, and all those kind of things, so you can transition a lot easier.
Yeah, just like having a legacy plan for your farm or an exit plan for your business. Having a transition plan for your farmer's market is important too.
It's like making a trust for your family.
or a prenup. You don't want to think negatively about these things, but almost every situation ends at some point.
Yes. Just
don't let it ruin the romance. Just make a plan.
Just make a plan.
Better to be prepared. Yeah.
So there's a number of things that are affected by how organizations decide to manage their markets. So there's some organizations where it's really going to be obvious. Sometimes it's the manager that owns the market. So there's not a lot of – that's not what we're talking about today, really.
That's not really a gray area at all. Yeah, you started it, you own it, you're running it, it's yours.
It's yours. You're responsible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how that's going
to
work.
And how – just as somebody who doesn't know, I've worked as a vendor at some markets that were owned by an individual, but – if you're a vendor or somebody that's not staff, how would you know if that is a situation?
You wouldn't necessarily know, and I'm not sure that.
Does it matter?
I'm not sure you need to know.
Okay,
if you're doing it right and you're doing it professionally, no matter what your structure is, then it's not really important that your farmers and vendors know. They may know, they may not know. Yeah.
Okay. And it depends on where you are. So in the city of San Diego, you have to be a nonprofit organization or a farmer in order to start.
Or a municipality. So
a municipality.
and that's the case in all of California, but that's not the case necessarily in
So
other
you
states.
have to be a certified California farmers market, just as like Justine's Farmers Market.
Not unless you were a farmer, or you could form an alliance with a nonprofit, and so you're managing. And typically, what's really happening there in a lot of cases is it's your market, but technically you're a contract manager because the nonprofit would hold the permit.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's
So
a
that's a permit
California
holder.
thing. It does. There's some variations of that in other states across the country, but in California, it's very, very clear. It's codified.
Yeah, and we've talked to a lot of places where like only a municipality can have the market. So as like a nonprofit can't just start a market, or a farmer can't just start a market in a city limit, on a city street or things like that. So it just depends how the city is structured, permitting wise.
In other areas, you can have Justine's Farmers Markets.
Yeah.
Well,
So
maybe
you-
I will.
I don't think so, Justine. What do we tell you about leaving us again? We'll find you. So it just depends where you are. So today we're going to talk about just kind of some various structures that we're familiar with and how those can work,
Right.
with different partnerships and things.
Right.
Yeah.
So with Justine's Farmers Market, it's very clear. And if you're the city of San Diego and you owned a market, which in San Diego they do not, but in some cities they do, then it's very clear. You're clearly using a staff. It would be unusual, in my experience at least, for a city to contract out. They typically use a staff member, oftentimes from Parks and Rec, because the farmers markets tend to be considered that kind of an event.
And we just had a guest from Michigan.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yes.
They're operated by Parks and Rec.
yeah, so
Yeah,
that's pretty
Okay,
common.
good example.
But what we're talking about today is mostly situations where a nonprofit wants to start a farmers market for whatever reason they might, and we'll talk about some of the reasons, or a chamber of commerce, or a business improvement district. That's pretty common now. So a Main Street organization or some other kind of community organization wants to have a farmers market as part of what they do to improve their community, or for other reasons. So there's a few reasons that they start those, and understanding why you're starting your market really informs what kind of manager you want to have. So for some organizations, it's really about being a fundraiser. So there's a lot of community organizations and especially business improvement organizations that have a market primarily because they want to net something from that event, just like they would from a music festival or another kind of event, or they want to bring traffic into their business district. So those are both valid reasons to start a farmer's market. They shouldn't be your only reason. You should give back to the basic elemental reason of improving financial sustainability for farmers, and then also for providing opportunities for small businesses in your area. But a lot of times it's one of those things that's important.
Yeah.
So if you understand that, that may affect how you decide your market's going to be managed, because the financial benefits and costs of hiring a contract manager versus using a staff person can vary. And sometimes it looks cheaper to use a staff person. But a staff person that's not trained to be a market manager and doesn't know how to maximize the operation of the market may mean that there actually isn't a net after you put your operating costs and things in, because maybe you're not attracting as many farmers and vendors, and that's because you're not attracting as many customers, so your rent rates have to be lower, or you don't know how to do the marketing specific to farmers markets so that the whole thing flows.
Yeah, thinking of it more of a business itself, the farmer's market is a business itself, versus this is like an activity that's happening where we're just popping tents. And so sure, Jane over here who works for Park and Rec, she can pop some tents. Like she's done something at the parks before. It's kind of thinking about that a little differently. And if there's someone on your staff that has the skill set to do that, that can be a really great solution. But you have to look at who is your staffer, like where are their skills, how trained are the people that are going to be running the market, and can they do what a market needs to have done, which of course, as we know, and everybody listening, if you're in the industry, it's kind of a complicated, hard to explain, occupation.
But at its core, a successful farmers market is very much about entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
and that doesn't always sink easily into the mindset of a municipal employee, because that's not where municipalities come from. What they do isn't necessarily supposed to be profitable. It's supposed to be a community service. Meshing that with the needs of a lot of farmers and entrepreneurs who have to make a profit can sometimes be a chore. And we have seen really effective Parks and Rec employees or other city employees in terms of running a market. And we have also seen Parks and Rec employees in particular that find it a huge burden and don't understand why their city wants them to do this and how this got into their job description.
And it also is, what if you're, the city decides we should have a farmer's market. Every city should have a farmer's market. But there's not really a customer base for it. You don't have farmers that want to be there, enough farmers that want to be there. You don't have enough people that are going to shop. So you really they have to analyze this just like any other group that would be putting together a farmer's market. Is this an area? Is this a city that has a need for a farmer's market? So if there isn't a need for that, or you haven't done all this kind of research on it, and then you just pop your Park and Rec person in there and try to get them to create this big kind of well-attended farmer's market, and it doesn't work. It could be for a variety of reasons, including this is just not the right time and space for that to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Or you get what we've seen in some communities is there's a huge public demand for a farmer's market. We want to have a farmer's market.
Yeah.
But nobody takes the time to get the community to articulate why.
Yeah.
Do they want to be there because they want a place to hang out and meet their neighbors? Do they want to be there because they actually want to buy fresh groceries and food products?
Or just because it's cute and they want to take photos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes a great
Yeah.
background for selfies.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a lot of people come to us as a San Diego Markets and say, hey, we want to start a farmer's market. Like, for instance, like in our big apartment complex.
Yeah, very often a developer.
That developer wants a big farmer's market. And while I understand that, farmer's markets are great. And, of course, you want to have one because it sounds like a cool, fun thing to do. After talking with them back and forth, it came down to there is a grocery store right next to this place. Your apartment residents, they aren't really home that much. They live there, but they're out during the day and hours that you want to have a market there. Why do you want to have it? And it really came down to just we thought we should have one.
And
Or
it's
it's
another thing
it's
to
a
put
PR
on
thing.
Yeah,
right.
PR.
We want to put it on our brochure for
Yeah.
leasing or for selling homes in
Because
this development.
it sounds attractive.
Yes,
Right.
and as we know, that doesn't have any longevity,
Yeah.
so not worth it starting a market. So,
So
finding out why, taking it back to your why constantly, which we say to all farmers market managers all the time. You should always be thinking about that. Why are you doing this market? And circle everything that you're doing back to that why. Why are you providing this?
Well, that's really smart. And it sounds like for a municipality or a business improvement district, if they do want to have staff in-house, either making sure that they have the budget to hire somebody new that can devote time and focus to that, or that they have somebody already on staff that has enough space in their workload to take on a really big project. It seems like that might be kind of the first misstep, is not recognizing that it really is an extreme full-time job to operate a market.
I mean, what's our favorite meme at Farmers Market Pros that Justine does variations of? It's that old question, what do you do the other 6 days?
Yeah.
And there's a lot to do those other 6 days. so-
Exactly. I think that probably is a big hang up for a lot of people. They think, this person will have some hours on Saturday. Great, they can run a farmer's market. And it's that's not going to work out.
Yeah.
That's not going to be, that's not going to... all the job entails way more than that. So just kind of explaining that to people, and not shameless plug for our conference, but there's other ways you can educate people. Make sure that your staff that's running the farmers market is educated in the farmers market side of operations. And there's lots of ways to do that. We think the conference is the best, but sending continuing consulting, continuing education, making sure they're prepared and that they know what their job role is.
Yeah.
Because if you train them to do park and rec things at public parks, and then you say, by the way, run this farmer's market too, that's kind of a different kind of subset of skills and expectations from them.
For sure. And the same thing goes for outside a municipality. If you take somebody like a Chamber of Commerce or a business improvement district, a lot of times they'll have somebody on their staff that runs an annual event that's awesome. And some of those skills do translate.
Yeah,
but some of them
renting
don't.
porta potties,
Sure,
or getting cars towed, or booking different vendors and stuff like that. But not necessarily talking to a farmer about, why they can't tie the bags of their produce.
Exactly. So
There's,
there may be some really specific regulations that you have to be aware of, and it's also honestly a really different situation to run a weekly event and maintain an ongoing relationship with somebody than it is to run a once a year art festival. So a lot of the annual events, you're only having contact with that person once a year, maybe earlier in the year when you book them, when you process an application. But running a weekly event where consistent attendance is important means really developing deeper relationships with your vendors and your farmers, getting them to trust you, helping them to take their business seriously, helping them to take your market seriously. It's a really different kind of thing than managing an annual event.
Yeah.
Definitely some overlap in terms of skill set, but also some unique needs that you don't necessarily have just because you know how to run an annual one-time event.
For sure. Just having that consistency in that week over week. And it's not like, oh, okay, like look forward to this one day. Okay, we did this one day and now it's done and look forward to the next year. It's like, okay, well, this week it might be raining and then next week it's going to be hot and, this person's out of town one week. And so you have to kind of account for that. So it's just dealing with those scheduling things week over week over week. That's definitely a lot different than doing an annual event.
Right. Mm-hmm. And because it involves so much agriculture and health regulation, depending on your area, some areas definitely don't have a lot of those regulations. Some of them, they're very intense. Somebody that has that specialized knowledge is important.
Yeah.
And sometimes just knowing how to deal with those regulatory agencies is important. And it may not be something that comes natural to you just because you know how to work at a chamber of commerce or you know how to run an event for businesses, a business mixer. It's really a different kind of level of knowledge and range of knowledge that you need to have.
Yeah, for sure.
What does translate pretty well between annual and weekly events is that there's always liability and risk management issues. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that if you're hiring an in-house person to manage your market, they need to be aware of that. And it may also be something that makes it enticing to hire a contract manager because then sometimes you can move some of that liability, responsibility, risk management attention over to a contract manager that's really wrapping their arms around it, has made a partnership agreement with you, or has created a contract with your organization, and they're taking over those requirements, those management issues, and the liability in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And making sure that if you're in a partnership, like you're not doubling up where both of you are holding some insurance and both of you are just, put those things together because there's such an expense and a lot of work and a lot of paperwork. See how you can work together with whoever if you're working with a nonprofit or a business group and you're an individual contractor, seeing what can overlap and what can be merged together.
Yeah, and you can find there's a big savings in that. We actually made some changes to the structure of our relationship with some of we typically, as outside of Farmers Market Pros on the San Diego Market's market management side, we typically are partnering or contracting with a business improvement district or some kind of a community group, a Main Street. And we found that by really analyzing those expenses, we could change some of the structure of how those things worked, about how the relationship was between us and those groups, and save everybody some money. We were paying double insurance in some areas and paying workers' comp, both of us paying huge workers' comp policies, and we were able to kind of restructure that and redesign it so that it worked better for everybody. So taking the time to think through all of those things as part of the process of deciding whether to go to a contract manager or a staff member, and then as part of the process, especially if you're contracting with somebody, of designing how that contract works is really important.
Yeah. Wouldn't also another benefit of choosing somebody who's a contract manager is chances are if they are on contract or they're, if they do contract work, they probably have operated other farmers markets before and have other farmers markets that they have connections to those vendors, and they can bring a level of focused expertise.
Yeah, and those relationships with the farmers and vendors is probably the single biggest reason that most organizations hire a professional farmers market manager or a professional farmers market management group, because starting from scratch to go out and recruit farmers and vendors to attend your farmers market, especially if you've never done a farmers market before, so those folks don't have any real confidence or assurance that this market's going to be successful, it's going to operate consistently, it's going to be open, rain or shine, you're going to do the proper amount of marketing for it. That's a lot more work than going to somebody who's already developed those relationships, that the farmers and food makers already trust them, and that they know that if they show up this event, it'll be handled properly, it'll be safe, it'll be well marketed, it'll generate a lot of customers. So that's probably the biggest reason that your chambers and your main streets and what have you go to a contract management system, is so that they can take advantage of those established relationships, expertise, and the trust level that the vendors and farmers have with those managers.
I think for sure. I think, just us having managed multiple markets, there's a lot of, pros to that where it's like, okay, I can talk to you at this market and make sure we're lining up with that market. I mean, and the business improvement groups really appreciate that we have these kind of established relationships and that we can get these really great farmers and really great vendors that everybody in town wants at their markets. We can get them at our markets because we've had this long-term relationship with them.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're managing it themselves, these farmers and vendors, their time is so valuable. And if they're not just starting out and kind of trying out new markets, they might not kind of want to like risk it going with a group that they don't know very well. They'd go with somebody that more has like it's a proven kind of success strategy for a contractor, a successful contractor.
Right.
It's a brand they trust.
It's a brand they
exactly.
trust. And it can work the other way, too. I mean, if you're a business improvement district group and you hire a manager who maybe doesn't have a great reputation or doesn't manage their markets in like a really tight way, that could also kind of shift the dynamic of your farmer's market because some vendors might say, okay, well, that's just not someone I want to work with. I'm not going to do this market. I'll go do a different market on this day with another manager. So if you're in the hiring process, it's good to look at the other markets that manager has, kind of see how the vendors are, see how the vendors feel about that market manager, and then make your decision if that's something that you want for your neighborhood. Because again, going back to your why are you doing this? And does that market manager bring that kind of energy into what you're trying to do in your neighborhood?
Yeah, a lot of times you'll see a market manager that has a certain group of farmers and vendors following them that have one tone, and then another contract manager that has kind of a different tone.
Mm-hmm.
Some managers tend to run very farm-forward markets. Some managers tend to be more concentrated on prepared food and maybe arts and crafts and that kind of thing. So depending on what your neighborhood wants in a market, it might be worth looking around at the different contract managers available because they tend to have their own little circus that goes along with them.
Yeah.
And, the tone that they bring can be very different.
Yeah. And also just like personality-wise, I mean, as a vendor, I worked at lots of different markets and some of them just like the personality of the market manager is very present in just the vibe of the market, and some of them are more reserved and you kind of don't even know who that person is. So depending on, the neighborhood the market is in or just the vibe of the Main Street or business development group, choosing somebody that is a good fit for your area and somebody that you're going to be able to work with and either reel in or give them a long leash to do their thing, and kind of finding how much control your group wants to continue to have.
Right. Yeah, that's really important too. And this is not hiring somebody to do an annual music festival.
Yeah.
This is somebody that's going to be in your neighborhood on your doorstep every single week all year, or at least a good part of it if you're in an area that has seasonal markets. This is a long-term relationship. This isn't a one-off. The other thing that can be an advantage to hiring a manager that does multiple markets is that there's some shared expenses there. So a manager that's running 3 or 4 markets a week can afford to have maybe more professional staff because those staff members can get enough hours. They can do cooperative advertising buys that advertise the various vendors that are in multiple markets, and so that's more affordable than paying for an ad for a single market. So there's a lot of things that can cross over there. They're sometimes able to develop better, more structured systems for applications and for permitting and things because it's something that they're doing with maybe a bigger team and doing on a more regular basis.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for a contract manager, there's a bunch of things that you want to figure out before you plunge into that. And if you are a contract manager and you're looking at developing a relationship with a new organization, there are also things you want to keep in mind. So probably the first one of those is deciding what the boundaries are going to be and who's responsible for what.
Yeah.
So some contract managers, have we been there? We've not only been there, we've consulted with some groups that haven't. And we talk about this in Vendor 101 and in all kinds of training, is that you want to make sure, doesn't matter what your agreements are, but you want to make sure that both sides have the same understanding of what's going to happen. And the best way to memorialize that is to put it all in writing. So you just, whether you want to work with an organization where they'll provide a lot of input and a lot of direction and a lot of instruction from their board maybe or from their executive director, or if you're a contract manager that prefers to be a party of one and a benevolent dictatorship and you just want to go give your report once a month to your board and have them say, great, doing a good job, keep doing what you're doing, just let us know what's up. both of those things can work really well, but you've got to make sure that both parties agree on what's the most comfortable way to work.
I think that's always like in any business too. That's just so important. It's not that one way is better than the other.
Yeah.
We operate in more of a like, please let us do this. We're the professionals. Thank you for, hiring us and putting us in your neighborhood, but we know what we're doing. And so, we don't like a lot of people meddling in the vendor application process or the structure of the market, just because we do feel like we're trained professionals and we can handle it. And not only that, but that's just not how our operation works. There's other people that they want a lot of input from the board. They want the board has a really good maybe like feel for the neighborhood. They live and work in the neighborhood. And so maybe that input is so valuable to you as a market manager, and you can work really well with that kind of partnership. So both ways are great ways to operate your market. It is just so important to make sure that both parties are clear on how the market's going to get run before you start running it, and before, one person doesn't understand what the other person is doing and why. So just being real clear about it.
I mean, some folks like their board to actually work at the market, which is great.
Oh, yeah.
They come out and work the information booth or
Sure.
Well, we had some people do that during COVID, which was nice.
that
with
was
volunteers.
great.
Yeah, that was helpful.
Yeah.
Bringing them in. So, I mean, you want to have a really great partnership with your board, like we've talked about before in other episodes, presenting like annual reports to your board. You're at the board meetings. You're working with them. You're letting them know when new vendors are coming in, exciting events that are happening, letting them know when there's issues, maybe with a grumpy business nearby or something where they can kind of, finesse a situation and kind of help out. But it's just, what level of partnership are you in on this? Like, what level of cooperative kind of decision making are you doing with whoever you're working with, either a city or a business improvement district Main Street group?
Well, and you need to know whose desk has the sign that says the buck stops here.
Yeah.
So especially when you're looking at things like applications, type of vendors that you're going to accept, do you have a limitation on your number of a certain category of vendors because there are competing businesses nearby? You want to know who gets to make that final decision, because the very worst thing you can do for a vendor or for a neighboring business is confuse them about who actually gets to make that decision.
Yeah. And also, I could see as if you're a contract manager of a farmer's market, you don't necessarily want vendors to be able to say, well, let me speak to your manager, and be able to like kind of go around you to...
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really good, pleasant experience working with Little Italy, for instance, because some vendors who don't like the way our criteria is structured will try to go and talk to the board above us, and they are so great about saying, hey, we hired San Diego Markets to operate our market. They make the decisions about this. Like, please speak to them about it. And they're just,
And even if they have an opinion on it or they have a question about something we're doing, they take that up with us.
Yeah,
they
that's
don't.
nice.
We always present a united front. They always throw it back to us, even if we may have an internal conversation. There is never any implication that you can go around us and get a different kind of decision by going to the board or the organization.
And Kat and I are always like calling it a mom versus dad kind of situation. Like, I tell my kids, don't parent shop. Where like, okay, mom said no, so go ask dad. And that's just a human nature thing to do, I think. So vendors will pick up on that, and they'll pick up on that real quick if they can go around you and get a different answer, and that will kind of bring a result to fruition for you. They're going to pick up on that. They're going to tell their vendor friends, and you're going to be in a pickle as a market manager. So just make sure that everyone just understands who's making the final decision on things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really important. So setting those boundaries, and being just real consistent about them. It's the same way we manage. Our belief is you have clear communication about what the expectations are, and then you enforce those expectations absolutely consistently. It's not one group gets special treatment and another doesn't. You need to work with the organization that you're employed by to make sure that everybody's on that same page.
And on that note, too, just as a contract manager, being able to listen to the board, to listen to your city or whoever you're working with, and just not pushing back so hard and not saying, I'm going to do things my way. This is my market. It does have to be a partnership, even if you are the experts. I mean, I do feel like just listening to the board and listening to their concerns, surrounding businesses sometimes have concerns, and you have to listen to them too, because they're running their business as well. So just being respectful about it is just really, and it'll benefit you in the long run. I feel like we have a good reputation as good market managers because we're so respectful to everyone that we work for and everyone that we work with, and just listening and taking that all into consideration and making changes in our management style based on things that are brought to our attention, or giving people explanations they might not understand. Taking the time to explain why you're doing something is really important to kind of just help grease the wheels a little bit.
Yeah,
That's huge.
And seeing that the farmers market is like holistically part of the community that it's in, and not just this like it's all about the market. You know, if the surrounding businesses are upset at you, or if the people that live in that neighborhood don't like the way something is working, then eventually it's going to impact the success of the market. So having your board kind of having a more of a bird's eye view of the way that the market fits into the neighborhood as a whole.
Yeah, and
helpful.
starting out with a set of communication and expectations and explanations before you start is helpful so that they don't get put on the spot. So the board member doesn't know what the answer is when a neighboring business asks why this vendor's allowed to be there. If you give them some of those tools up front, it saves everybody aggravation.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. So I think the idea is just to get things in writing, make sure that the contract terms are beneficial to everybody. I know that some managers get sensitive about the idea that they're going in to set up a new market especially, or taking over a market in its very early stages. And a lot of times those first years of a market require a lot of investment that maybe the contract manager in particular is contributing to. And then they don't know how long they're going to be there. So there's always a fear that their information or their systems or what they do is going to be kind of observed and taken over by that organization. And then 3 years down the road, when the market actually does make a net, they're pushed out and they don't get to take advantage of that. So that's why a lot of times a contract manager won't come in to work with an organization unless they guarantee them a certain term, a certain length of contract, and are really specific about what the contract renewal terms are.
Yeah, I can definitely feel like you're spending your time and energy and maybe lots of knowledge that you've invested your own personal time and money in getting to train your replacement. So if you don't have a long-term agreement with your business group as a contractor, and you're doing all this thing and you're giving them all this information about the market, it can just feel like you're setting them up to take over once the market is super profitable, which can, not feel so great sometimes. So just having that agreement ahead of time is, really important. And as a Main Street group or nonprofit group or whoever, if you're hiring a contract manager, just understanding that your manager, is keeping some systems kind of internal and that they're going to give you all the, important information. But it's like if you hire a PR company, you're hiring them to do contract work. When they leave, they're not going to give you all their contacts at the TV station. They're not going to give you all the names of writers that they speak to at magazines and things like that and how they do their PR. That's just, we're contract managers. That's what we're doing. So it's a fine line because it's in your neighborhood. But if we're running it and building it, some of that stuff is ours.
That's true. Yeah. Your stylist isn't going to tell you how to cut your hair.
Yeah. That's true. My stylist tried to during COVID, and I couldn't do it, and now I pay her extra. So maybe they'll understand a little bit. But yeah, it is kind of a fine line. And the way we work, I'm happy to kind of say, oh, this is what we're doing, and give a lot of reports. If they're paying attention at your, during your reports and things, they can get an idea of how things are run. But to just kind of wait until the market's profitable and then pull the rug out from under them and try to take over and try to get all that information from them. That just is not really like a fair arrangement for a contractor. So keeping that in mind on both sides.
And that's a good thing for contract managers either who are just starting out or are looking to enter a new relationship with a new neighborhood business development group is just, in a nice way explaining that what you do is a very specialized set of skills. It's not just running an event. It's not just this or that. And, kind of in a value yourself way and express that to the people who are hiring you. And because we have seen and we've consulted with groups that have kind of taken contract managers for granted, or they've gone from outsourcing the work and then taking it in-house and realizing how hard it is. So
yeah, I think a lot of times they don't realize everything that goes into it. And that does happen. So sometimes a contract manager outgrows a market. Maybe you start a new market for an organization. It's not a market that's ever going to grow into something that requires as large an organization as you have as a contract manager, and maybe it makes sense to transition it into an internally run event. But you want to have the terms of that transition outlined when you first start. Getting back to the prenup, you don't want to take the romance out of it, but you want to plan ahead for the decent chance that at some point you're going to have a transition and that maybe a manager's going to change, maybe they're going to switch to a new contract manager that's a better fit for their personality, maybe they're going to bring it in-house. And it's good to remember that, gosh, how do we talk about this? So you're leaving a market maybe that you started or that you managed for a long time. Everybody involved, whether it's the organization or the contract manager, hopefully wants that market to continue to succeed. And just like when you leave a relationship or you leave a job, you know, we've all got that little sliver of feeling that, hope they fail.
Yeah, you're a little bitter, but that's not
you
the
want to win the breakup.
Yeah, you want to win the breakup.
That's right. And what we really want is for the market to win.
For sure,
because it's not going to if you're going to stay in the farmers market industry, even though you're leaving a particular market or a particular market relationship with an organization, you still want everybody to feel good about farmers markets. And if you create a big public kind of conflict situation, or you express even just to your farmers and vendors, which I guarantee you is immediately public.
That you will not believe the gossip chain of the farmers and vendors.
We're all close. We all talk.
If you want someone to know something, just tell one of them.
Tell one farmer.
Yeah.
You don't want that to be a negative story that's out there. No matter how it's ending, you want to be sure to maintain a professional attitude, look for the positives in the change or transition that's going on, and you want to make sure that that's publicly expressed. If you have disputes or disagreements or you're unhappy with the way this situation is ending, try to keep that internal between you and your client, because it's not going to serve you well in the long term to go public with that, to go negative on it, to make your farmers and vendors feel bad about that.
Yeah.
Because what happens to a farmer's market happens to the public perception of all farmers markets. So you want to keep that still a strong, positive presentation that's happening, at least in the public eye.
Yeah, and it impacts the individual business owners.
Exactly.
You know, if there's a big explosion, the internal operations of a market, it could very easily throw off sales for a couple weeks for vendors, or vendors might get stressed and pull out and lose money, or, you know, it's impacting a lot more than just the BID and the contract manager or whatever the situation is. There's
exactly
a lot of people that could have, you know, real impact on their businesses. So,
and I think for most of us, the why really is supporting small farmers, supporting small businesses, making sure that people can make a living and develop relationships between the people that produce their food and the people that eat their food. And so the rest of it certainly impacts us day to day, but let's keep our eye on the ball.
Yeah.
And the idea that promoting the value of farmers markets versus another kind of shopping, promoting the idea of small farmers versus other kinds of food production, that's really what we want to concentrate on.
For sure. Yeah, keeping that food access in mind, too. If your community is used to having food access in your neighborhood, and then professionally you feel burned, or for whatever reason you're leaving, you know, your contract work in that neighborhood, try not to let it impact the access that the community has to the food at your market. And just, you know, sometimes you just got to suck it up and be that professional and help that transition happen smoothly so the market can continue to operate no matter who's going to operate it after you.
And you'll go forward and find a good fit in another area.
For sure.
You know, there's always you'll be moving on in a good way, and that little karma will come back to you, and you'll end up in a really happy market next.
Yeah.
So, it'll work out.
Well, I think we could probably go on and on about the detailed work that contract managers or even individual staff working for a city or a nonprofit have to do, and all the nuances in that that we've seen or that we've done ourselves. But I feel like that was enough information for your ears today.
At least until we hear more from Michael Hurwitz at the Intense Conference
I'm
about
excited
transitions
to hear from him
and
too.
moving on.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, thanks so much for listening today, everybody, and we will catch you next week.
Thank you for listening today, and big thanks to MarketWurks for streamlining systems to make things easier for market managers and for supporting Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. MarketWurks has been a sponsor of Intense, the Farmers Market Conference, almost from the beginning, and we're excited to welcome Chris and his team back in 2022. Find more information about MarketWurks by clicking their logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Farmers markets are all about connection, and all of us, operators, farmers, and vendors, keep learning. Join us and your fellow market participants at the 6th Annual Intense, the Farmers Market Conference in San Diego, California on March 7th, 8th, and 9th, 2022 to grow your market and your community. Connect with people just like you from various parts of the country and share what's happening in your area in the terrific conversations over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros or email us at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. Thanks for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcast, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. If you are listening on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni-Mead. Original music by David Mead. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll have another great episode next week. Tune in.